right, welcome everybody. Our conversation today is about record sealing and the opportunities it creates. This is not only a critical topic, it is a hot topic. Just a few weeks ago, President Biden announced a mass pardon for people convicted of federal marijuana possession because expungement is not available in federal law. But in states like Kansas, there are laws that make expungement broadly available. On November 8th, Missouri voters will vote on the recreational use of marijuana, and the measure calls for expungement of criminal records for involvement for nonviolent marijuana offenses. And public data tell us that expungement of their criminal records contributes to the advancement of racial justice and elimination of inequality. For many LSC grantees, expungement, sealing, and other record relief is a major and growing area of practice because these measures help lead to stabilization of clients' families, housing, employment, and overall well-being. Hence the name of our topic, creating opportunity through record sealing. Kansas is a model of this work, and joining me today to discuss this model are Marilyn Harp, who has now been introduced at least 4 or 5 times today, and so I will just say, I'm going to dispense with most of the introduction, that KLS serves more than 30,000 Kansas each day, so 30,000 Lindas each year, I should say, 30,000 Lindas each year. I'm also joined by Joyce Springfield, who is the statewide director of pro bono services for Kansas Legal Services, and by Nick Larkin and Morgan Lawrence, who are both newer members of the KLS team. Morgan and Nick are staff attorneys involved in the statewide expungement program, and they are focusing on assisting individuals with mental health and substance abuse issues in getting their criminal records expunged to achieve independent living. And also with us and next to me is a key KLS project partner and research leader, Renee Dancer. Renee is the Associate Director of Research and Strategic Partnerships at the Access to Justice Lab at Harvard Law School. And Renee conducts rigorous research into improving access to justice and assessing the needs, strengths, and weaknesses of the courts, the justice communities, and users of these systems. And as we'll develop, Renee and her colleagues and other researchers really play a key role for LSC and our grantees. Marilyn, let's get started with some context building. We're talking about expungement of criminal records, and I suspect some members of our audience might be scratching their heads thinking, if LSC is the country's largest funder of civil legal aid for low-income Americans, why are we talking about expungement, and what does KLS do to provide representation and direct assistance to individuals looking to have their criminal records sealed? So tell us about who's eligible for services.
Well, we're fortunate that the definitions that LSC puts in place allow us to step in after the adjudication and do the record sealing. But really, we are a poverty elimination law firm. And one of the chief ways we can eliminate poverty in people's lives is to open up the opportunities that come to them if their criminal records are sealed from the public. Nothing about expungement changes the ability of courts or prosecutors and a whole list of employers to see those records. But we are on the verge, as Justice Lukert was talking about, one of the advances she didn't speak to in particular is a process that we are mere months from a point in Kansas where going onto the court's website can put in a name and see every case, criminal or civil, that's in which that person is a party. And for people with 15-year-old, 30-year-old convictions, that kind of, who are clearly eligible in Kansas for an expungement, that kind of widespread and easy public access is going to deny them jobs and housing and many of the things that would advance their families and their communities if they were able to take advantage of the law that sealed their record.
So when we look at our grantees across the country and we look at what kind of cases they handle, primarily housing, family law, employment, that's sort of the bread and butter of civil legal aid in America. And when we talk about expungement, you know, at first blush you think about sort of a backward-looking process because it's sealing something that happened in the past. But you know, I would submit that it's really a forward-looking process that opens up opportunities with respect to employment, housing, family issues. Can you elaborate on that?
Ron, you're absolutely right about what research is starting to show us can happen for people if they're able to access the second chance that an expungement has. And we should be clear that although Ron's remarks focus a little bit on the hot topic of marijuana convictions in Kansas, the opportunities for expungement are really much, much broader than that. So any misdemeanor of any sort can be expunged after 3 years. Most felonies can be expunged after 5 years. And so it's really a very a wide opportunity in Kansas for that. And with that comes the opportunities to not have the landlord fail to renew your lease because they found out that you have an old conviction, not have the bank deny your mortgage application because of something in the distant past, or most recently there were a whole bunch of people who could not qualify for PPP loans, payroll protection plan loans, because they had a 30-year-old conviction, and that was just one of the things written in as a criteria. So there's a part of our population that are just left out of things the rest of us take for granted because of something that the law has said they have the right to seal.
So, as has been mentioned several times today, you've been at Kansas Legal Services for 43 years, which seems impossible, but we'll put that to one side. When did expungement become a thing? I mean, has KLS been doing expungement work for 43 years, or what's been the timeline on it?
Not really, not at all have we been doing it for 43 years. I would say 6 or 7 years ago we did none, although the law hasn't changed. What's changed has been a new prioritization that if we're looking for something that can change people's lives, we're not in a position to somebody else is fighting for the minimum wage for people. That's not us. But if we can take some action to help more people qualify for that, for those better jobs, then that's something we can do. And so we now have gone from 0 cases to about 1,000 people a year, either online, either access forms online that we make available, or get direct help from us, or one of our pro bono clinics. So you're going to hear about all those pieces of that. And really, when we think about what we can do to move people out of poverty, it's a pretty light lift compared to many of the other things that might happen. So, I mean, you might say we've taken the easy way out, but in terms of our staff time, but it's a tremendous effect for them.
Well, and that's very impressive. I mean, going from 0 cases in a case category to 1,000 a year, or at least 1,000 people who are accessing the resources, potentially 1,000 Lindas, is really quite impressive. And I will say we've seen a similar trend throughout the country, a great increase in expungement work over the course of the last decade. Joy, as I'm sure you know, ABA's Pro Bono Week is about to start on Sunday, And the Pro Bono Institute, in its survey of pro bono work across the country, has seen a growing interest in doing expungement work, and particularly doing expungement work in light of the tie between expungement and creation of opportunities, and ties between expungement work and diminishing racial injustice. Could you talk about how local pro bono volunteers in Kansas have worked with you on your expungement practice, and why pro bono, or why expungement is a good match for pro bono lawyers?
Thank you. I think it's a good match. First of all, we're having an expungement clinic October 28th during Pro Bono Week in Manhattan, Kansas. And I think it's a good match for attorneys in private practice because we organize it for a day, or maybe in November we're having one in Leavenworth County for a week. And we have shifts. So it doesn't take a lot of time to change somebody's life. So you can work like a morning shift or afternoon shift, or you can work all day. And also, because of the rule 6.5, it's going to be limited scope. So you don't have to take those contacts back with you in conflicts. If you know there's no conflicts with your firm, you can go forward and help somebody, and you don't have to take a representation to the court. We could just help them fill out their forms, make sure everything is complete. And I think it is like immediate gratification because you're sitting in front of somebody usually, and you're helping them and talking about their life and getting involved and helping them move forward. And also you make friends, you have fun with other attorneys and other legal staff, and we try to make it fun, easy event, and hope that you come back.
Well, that's great. What's the date and location of your?
Okay, Manhattan, Kansas, October 28th, all day at the Manhattan Public Library. Let me know if you'd like to volunteer. And we're also having a expungement week at Leavenworth County Courthouse, November the 14th through 18th. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. And we have food. I love free food, so we'll have food and drinks. And sometimes in the past we've had events, and a law firm like Pringle or something will like have a happy hour for us. So.
Well, good deeds and psychic rewards are
Yes.
excellent, but food and drink are often even better inducements. Nick, we've already sort of been talking in general terms about expungement and how that can be life-changing. Can you talk about how your work, what KLS's work has meant for low-income individuals with criminal records? Is there a client story that you could maybe share with us that would sort of bring these concepts to life?
Yeah, sure. So expungements can have a huge effect on individuals that we represent as well as their families. Like it's been mentioned, expungements can open up avenues to employment, housing, and education that aren't available to people with felonies on their current record. And yeah, I can talk about one current client that we have. And for privacy purposes, we'll just call him Bruce. So Bruce was convicted of a drug offense in like the early 2010s, and that landed him on the drug offender registry. And he saw that as a wake-up call. He went through his sentence, and the best way to describe it is that he went through it hurriedly. He was released from confinement and put on probation, and he got released from probation on good behavior. And the probation officer told him that he was just wasting his time and that he could get off early. So Bruce, after that, went right to work, but he re-entered, community without realizing the effect that a felony could have on him and his work and housing. He just found low-paying jobs, and at one point in time, he tried to apply for like a better housing situation and was denied. So that was kind of like a wake-up call. But he did not despair. He continued to work low-paying jobs, and he worked at one long enough where they actually paid for a gastric bypass surgery. So he was putting himself and his family, he's got a wife and an older daughter, into a better financial position, but he was also, in a better, healthier position as well. So he continued to do that, and in late 2021, he heard about our services for expungement, and he made an application. We kind of reviewed it and determined that because he was still on the drug offender registry, that he wouldn't be qualified to have an expungement at that time. However, a few months ago, the Kansas legislature, they amended the Kansas registration law, and it allowed for an exception to people on the drug offender registry. So it gives opportunities to people with who are on the drug offender registry an option to petition for relief from the registry early, because Bruce would have been on the registry till about 2030. And so we looked at our past clients and we saw that Bruce was likely eligible for this new change. So we contacted him and he was immediately on board. We drafted his documents, both his petition for relief from the drug offender registry and expungement petition. So we sent that into the court, and we heard that just this past week that it just got accepted by the judge, signed off on both orders. So in the upcoming weeks, the KBI will remove him from the drug offender registry. His convictions will be removed from public view. So now he can have an opportunity to move into that new apartment complex, a better housing situation, as well as apply for a supervisory role in his company that he works at. So, he'll be in a better financial situation, but it'll also give him personal closure from the life that he lived and the life that he kind of created for himself.
Thanks, Nick. What roughly was the time period between the filing of the petition and the response from the court?
It can take a fair amount of time, especially because this is like a new petition. It took like a month and a half or something. It's a new process, so it took a little bit of time.
Well, I don't know, a month and a half for creating a lifetime of opportunities sounds like
It's a pretty good deal.
not bad to me, but that's a great story. Thanks. Renee, I'd like to turn to you. LSC is a national funder, accountable to Congress and American taxpayers. And Congress and our board and the taxpayers expect us and our grantees to the extent we can to use data to make decisions both about grant making and about allocation of resources. And your team at the Access to Justice Lab at Harvard conducts research to provide those data, and because they don't just pop out of the woodwork. So could you talk about your involvement in Kansas and how it arose?
We at the Access to Justice Lab use rigorous research to understand what does and what doesn't work to improve access to justice in the legal system. So in Kansas, we're working on an evaluation with KLS, and we're evaluating the expungement process. And you can think of expungement, right, as record clearing broadly throughout the country. So other states obviously have record clearing remedies as well, and other legal services agencies are using are providing assistance with record clearing. But this collaboration arose kind of how the best collaborations arise. We put out there in the legal community that we're interested in investigating these issues, and Marilyn, like she does best, was in the right place to say yes, right? She rose her hand and said, we want to help you with this investigation in Kansas. And so at this point, I think of KLS and Marilyn and the entire team as friends. I've been to Kansas a number of times now that the evaluation is proceeding, but we're really looking forward to helping to understand exactly how expungement in Kansas is serving the Kansas population.
So give us a little more detail. What are you trying to learn, and how are you going about learning it, and what's the status of your work together?
Sure. So ultimately, we're hoping to understand through the use of a randomized control trial the effect of expungement on housing and employment stability. So we just
Let me interrupt. What's a randomized control?
Sure.
At least you didn't say RCT. But
Well, I am actually a lawyer, not a researcher, so by trade at least. So a randomized control trial is when you randomly sort folks into different groups to remove any external factors that may be affecting the outcome, so that you can come to a more precise determination that the intervention that you're studying is the reason for the effect, right? So in this particular randomized control trial, some folks are getting full scope legal services from Kansas Legal Services from the start of their expungement filing through to the end of that need. And so sometimes that's not just the order, right? The KLS has also done great work at making sure those records actually are removed from the locations they're supposed to be removed. And so that can be another extra step. The other group of folks are receiving limited scope services. So it's not like they're getting nothing. And in fact, KLS's limited scope services are quite robust. So KLS has already, prior to the evaluation, had built a self-help tool, because we know that legal services, in fact, we heard from John Levy this morning or this afternoon that there's not enough funding, right, to serve all of the folks in the country that need legal services. So we know that KLS is not able to help everybody that comes to their door. So they had already addressed that issue through this kind of robust guide and file electronic self-help petition. So that is our limited scope services. However, for the purposes of this study, they added on one additional step, which was meeting for a short, brief advice session after folks had finished their petition online, drafting it themselves, to make sure it was legally sufficient, but also to provide them some guidance on what they can expect next, which I think is a huge, huge step and help for people working through the justice system on their own.
So, at least as I understand it, what we're trying to get at is what do you get if you get full service, and what are the results if you get robust self-help assistance? Exactly.
So ultimately, we're trying to understand the effect of expungement on housing and employment stability. We heard through Bruce's story, our Bruce, who is real but fictitious name, that we believe, right, that this expungement opened up opportunities that Bruce otherwise didn't have. So that's what we're hoping to understand, truly the extent of those opportunities that can be opened up. But through the process, because of the way the study is designed, we're also going to have the opportunity to understand the effect of full scope versus limited scope services on the client population, which is a great way to understand resource allocation for legal services in Kansas, but also throughout the country, right? Is it enough to provide robust self-help services, and you're still serving generally to the best extent you can, the population, allowing you to reserve your full scope legal services for other more complex matters? Or is this a complex matter that really needs full scope legal services? And in that instance, if that is in fact the case, do we need to devote more resources to that? And do we need to then allocate more resources to our legal services agencies specifically for those types of cases?
Well, so Marilyn and Renee, we're on the edge of our seats. So what have you seen so far, and have there been any aha moments?
Yeah, so I have so many, but I'm going to condense them, and I'm happy to talk more about this because I don't want to take up all of our time. But I think the biggest aha moment that I have had, or that we have had at the Access to Justice Lab, is truly looking at that success rate between the two groups of folks, the limited scope and the full scope. We knew, and I think we generally understand as a legal community, that providing full scope lawyer assistance to folks is the best solution for most types of cases, and we could probably go to all types of cases, right? We know that people will get better results. But we expected to see a difference, but what we didn't expect to see was the great difference that we are seeing. So we are seeing, and we're still in the midst of the study. All of our folks who are going to participate in this study are in the study, but their cases are some of them still have cases pending. We see a success rate for folks that KLS helps between 65 and 75%. We're seeing consistently in the limited scope group between 12 and 18%. So it's a huge gap. And so it really does tell us, and we really do suspect that while we may suggest that this is an on-paper process and perhaps that seems less complex, that it actually is an incredibly complex process. And it's not just in Kansas that is the case, right? These are pieces of legislation that are multi-part, often involving subparts, often involving the litigant providing information that has long since been left from their memory and perhaps not easily accessible in the record. So that's not just in Kansas, that's across the US. And so to me, we have to really think about this problem as either providing greater resources for legal services agencies to provide full scope representation for these cases and stop necessarily categorizing things into complex and not complex and really thinking about complexity as it relates to the person attempting to navigate the system on their own. Or we need to change the law. And I'm not suggesting that those are mutually exclusive either. I mean, we could be doing those in tandem, but I don't see another solution just yet. So I found that to be one of the greatest aha moments. The other one that I will highlight and then let Marilyn have a moment as well is as a part of our data collection, we have a multi-pronged data collection process. We're collecting administrative records from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Labor, the Department of Revenue, the utility companies. These are all to understand employment and housing both prior to the expungement and after the expungement if folks are successful in their expungement. But we're also surveying all of our participants on a very regular schedule. So we survey folks every 3 weeks for a period of 2 years as they participate in this evaluation. That's a lot of surveying. And in those questions, we want to hear from participants what they think about their employment, what they think about their housing, what they think about their general well-being, whether or not they feel like this process is deterring them from additional engagement in the justice system, for example. And we have had just an outstanding response rate among both groups. So you might think the folks who are in the limited scope group would feel like they have less incentive to participate, but that is not the case. We have found that this is a particularly motivated population. Folks who are working on clearing their record, that is the population that I'm talking about. And so our response rate has been consistently in the high 80 to 90% rate. So our survey data alone will be so robust, we'll have such important insights about the community of individuals that need and are attempting to access these services that will be so useful to really develop and deliver these services going forward with an eye towards community need and want.
Wow, I mean, 65% for the fully represented, 4 times roughly, by my calculation, the positive results of people who are getting pretty robust limited services. Marilyn, any other aha moments for you?
Well, I have 2. One is that Renee's really fun to hang out with, and I've had the pleasure of several of her trips here. But second, she's really challenged me to think about, why does an expungement process need to list the crime when the prosecutor obviously knows what that is? Why does it need to list the date somebody got off probation when the court record's full of that information? I mean, we're making people look up stuff that just takes time and is just a barrier. And that is a statutory requirement, but we could accomplish the same thing much easier. So that's been kind of an aha moment for me, even filling out the form. What if it said, I want an expungement and I think I'm eligible? And that was it.
Yeah, I think throughout the United States, I won't talk about the rest of the world, both at the state government level and at the federal government level, there are forms and processes that are far more complicated than they need to be substantively. And again, exactly as you say, listing dates. I mean, we've all had forms where you had to, list every residence you've had in the last 40 years. And we can all picture those places, but what the address was or what the exact dates were, who knows? And that just adds to the complexity. So this is obviously important. It's not only important to Kansas, but it's important to every other jurisdiction that has this sort of expungement or record sealing program. So what are you doing to share your results and make sure that this isn't just a one-off that informs Kansas?
Yeah, so I mean, I would certainly be remiss to say, if I didn't say that we hope to use these results to encourage other legal services agencies and other justice system partners, right? We don't just work with legal services agencies where our goal is access to justice. So that's for anyone that's participating in that mission, right? So I would be remiss if I didn't say that we hope to have this evaluation with its great success be an encouragement to other organizations and entities who want to improve access to justice to think about evaluation as you're designing programs and to not just implement a program and assume that it's working just fine without actually evaluating and testing and then iterating, right? The purpose of evaluation is for you to grow and iterate your program so that it is providing the community what the community needs. But how do we get this work out? I mean, this is a perfect example of how we discuss and get this information out. So we definitely love to participate in panels like this, but we do a lot of writing, we do a lot of trade conferences, but really what we really enjoy is being at community events where we can actually speak to not just people working in the justice system, but folks who are using the justice system or who need to use the justice system. Because the point is to make sure we're understanding how to make the justice system accessible to everyone. And the only way to know that is to ask people what is causing barriers to their ability to access the system and what kinds of services do they actually need, right? So we love to be in the community talking with community members and also making sure that our research is actionable for them. Now, our purpose of the research is to allow you all an evidence base to really go and then advocate for what you need. But we are also happy to participate by providing the results of research and participate in that advocacy with you.
Morgan, I want to turn to what I think is a very exciting new program that KLS is involved in. It's primarily state-funded expungement for special populations, particularly people with mental health and substance abuse challenges. Can you tell us more about it and who the intended beneficiaries are and what does that process and your work look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Ron said, and Marilyn kind of mentioned this earlier, we primarily work with people who suffer from mental illnesses, substance abuse disorders, and we work to help them get expungements of their criminal records, and especially for the populations that we work with, it's to help them transition back into the community, as most of the residents or people that we work with are residents of mental health facilities or substance abuse recovery centers. Nick and I, who's right beside me here, are the two attorneys on the project, and we also have two paralegals as well, Amy and Andy. And our project's kind of fun. It's separated into two subcategories. So we have Nick, who works with people who suffer from mental illnesses and have crimes related to that. And then I work with people who suffer from substance abuse disorders and their related crimes, which is usually, drug convictions and things along those lines. And for our process, we pretty much do absolutely everything we can. We walk the clients through the process from start to finish. We draft documents, we represent them in court, and we stick around long enough to make sure that their records are actually removed, which turns out to be kind of fun. In addition to expungements, we also travel to mental health facilities and substance abuse recovery centers around the state to provide trainings on expungements and fair housing to the staff members themselves. And the purpose of that is to make sure that the staff members actually have the knowledge that they need to help their residents get back into the community, so they know what to look for and what's kind of available for their residents. And our project is actually kind of cool in this sense. It also has a preventative aspect as well. So even though we focus on people who live in mental health facilities, substance abuse recovery centers, we also can expand out into the community. So we're working with specialty courts and things like that to provide expungements. So people who may be at risk of going into these facilities don't end up there. We're trying to be kind of that intervention to keep people from reaching that point. And expungements overall is incredibly important. And Marilyn she talked about it a little bit before too. But especially in housing, people with mental illnesses and substance abuse disorders, they are considered disabled under federal and state law. And unfortunately for this group, they experience a lot of stigma just in getting housing, period, without their criminal records even considered. This group, landlords tend to reject them outright because of their illnesses, because of their struggles. And adding criminal records on top of that makes it much worse. And people do struggle with that. And so generally, landlords will use these criminal records as a pretext to discriminate and deny them housing. And so even if they are fully rehabilitated, they're on their treatment plans, they're still going to face problems in the community just to try to get a basic, not privilege, but a basic need is housing. And so that's where we kind of come in. That's been our whole purpose here, is to make sure that we are helping as many people as we can try to get their record expunged, because most of the issues that they at least face with criminal records is decreased. The landlords can no longer see those records. And so people are at least able to get their foot in the door more so than they were before. And this is incredibly significant because finding and maintaining housing is the cornerstone to continue maintaining their sobriety, holding a stable job, adhering to their treatment plans and things like that. So without housing, they're pretty much just kind of destined for failure. And so adding the expungement portion of this, removing their criminal records from view, really sets them up for success in the future.
Well, this is very exciting, and the study we've been talking about is very exciting. We could obviously talk about it for another several hours, but I want to thank Marilyn and Joy and Nick and Morgan and Renee for being here today and for all the work you're doing in this area. It's terrific. Please join me in thanking them.